Hi, everyone. This is Nancy with Relationships of the Heart with Nancy. This is our podcast for leaders. This is the place where we feature leaders serving in various capacities. Sometimes we may have a pastor, but many times, like in the past, we have had Irene, who is the leader of Young Living. She built a team from zero. She started from the beginning with no team, and what we talked about was what it looked like for her to build a team. And then we moved into the Association of Christian Truckers with Pastor Mark. Mark is a very unique pastor. He is the interim director for the Association for Christian Truckers, and he is also the development director for that organization. So we talked to Mark, and then in the future we will be speaking with a church planter from out in California, and he began his ministry in a large children's ministry, and just a few years ago he moved into planting a very unique church. But today is who we're bringing to you is the editor-in-chief of Global Prayer Digest. He has kindly accepted coming on here with me to share exactly what is Global Prayer Digest and what it's about. So first is what I'm going to do. I'm just going to allow Keith to share. Again, I just shared that, but his title and what exactly, how he serves in his leadership capacity at GPD. So welcome, Keith, and if you'd like to just share with us, share your title again and kind of give us a description of what you do as a leader within GPD.
Okay, yes, I'm Keith Carey. I've been with Global Prayer Digest for 33 years now, working under Frontier Ventures, which is a ministry in Pasadena, California. And the goal of our organization is to see every ethnic group in the world reached for Christ. So if you look up Matthew 24:14 or Matthew 28:18 to 20, you see how Jesus really fleshes it out. What we're trying to do is make sure that we have prayer for those specific ethnic groups that still don't have a gospel witness and people are not being discipled as Jesus wants them to be.
You know, I just find Global Prayer Digest to be just a very valuable resource, especially because really we have as a general public, no matter where we live, we have no excuse to not be involved because we don't have to get on a plane or apply for a visa to another country. Those are all good things to travel. But people can join in and become part of GPD wherever they're at, whether they are sitting at their desk, whether they're driving along. There's always room somewhere in our life to pray. And Keith, also, you said as a editor, you have served, what'd you say, 30 years with GPD?
33 years. 33,
wow. You know, I call that, when I hear someone that has been with an organization, to me it can be, I look at over 10 years, but 33 years. To me, that means, as I look at, we'll say you at GPD, that long ago God called you to something very specific, and it seems for 33 years He's kept you in this same spot. So long ago, what led you to become part of GPD? We're going to call Global Prayer Digest, for those listening, we're going to use GPD. So that's who we're speaking of, is Global Prayer Digest. So how Keith, what led you to become part of GPD so long ago?
It seemed like an accident. I came on staff, and previously I'd been working in a health spa, and I've been the personnel manager. I was the person hiring and training and interviewing people and so forth. And of course, you don't have many people who are going to be teaching aerobic classes here at a mission agency. But so they thought at first maybe I should be working in the personnel department. And anyway, but while I was here getting my training, it was about a 4-month period, they noticed the one thing that I do well is I meet deadlines. They had a production manager who kind of babysits the process of getting it printed and delivered and so forth. He was going to be leaving for China. So they put me in his role, and I started with that. Before long, I started to figure out I could get information that the writers needed. So I started to gather information, get that to the writers. Now in those days, that was before we had Joshua Project. Joshua Project actually has research that will tell you whether or not a people group would be reached or not reached with the gospel of Christ. So anyway, there was a lot of guesswork at the time. So I started gathering information. Before you knew it, I became the editor. And that took a little bit of time to really get good at that. Like anything else, you're always learning new things and always getting better at it as time goes on. And what happens is nowadays, now that I started off, we didn't even have the internet, and we didn't even have email at the time. Our writers were actually on site initially. Fast forward a number of years, and some of the writers I've never even seen. In fact, Nancy used to be one of my writers, and I've never seen you in person. I've just seen pictures of you. And that's the way it is with some of our writers. In fact, one of my writers in Alabama, I don't even know what she looks like. But that's how it is in the 21st century. People usually have come to me, and they would like to do something to serve the Lord. We have the information, and these are real short vignettes, about 230 words. That's about 3 paragraphs. That's all it takes, and we put it together and produce prayer guides on a regular basis.
Now, isn't there also, if I remember correctly, that GPD is translated into other languages?
Yes. I send the text material to people who translate it into Spanish, Korean, and Chinese. The largest is probably the Chinese. We have somewhere between 50,000 and 100,000 people who speak Chinese who use our prayer materials. Korean, we have some good opportunities to possibly grow. The Korean American market might be increasing. Spanish is always a little bit iffy, although right now it seems like it's more South American. The Argentines and the Bolivians are more involved. If you went back 10 years, it was more the Central Americans who were involved with it.
You know, I just find this amazing because I think I remember at one time we may have discussed the numbers on this, and you said, what, the Chinese, did you say 50 to 100,000?
That's what it sounds like. I've talked to different people. Some say 50,000, others say 100,000. That's between Chinese Americans here in the U.S. and people in Taiwan and people in the PRC.
Well, I just find this amazing because at GPD, this is something, let's kind of recap what I shared at the beginning of this, but that this is, no matter what language we speak or where we live or what our economic rung is, you know, whatever we do for our job, that anyone can become part of GPD. And that's what just amazes me, how God, when I look at these numbers, and I'm sure I'm going to guess you agree with me on that it's God that does this. It has just grown through the years. So I have this question for you because, you know, I know enough about printing with the little bit that I do that even though I am just one person sitting here at my desk and I have published a book and written a book, but it doesn't exist just because of me. There's other people involved to get this to happen. So GPD, if I remember correctly, goes out is it every 2 months now or every 3?
What happens is we have regular material for every day, but we'll publish 3 months in one booklet. It's printed in Taiwan, and right now it's at the end of January, but we're already writing our materials for October. And in Taiwan, they're busy printing our April, May, June issue in one booklet. And we may or may not get it back in time for people to be able to pray starting with April 1st.
You know, I also find that amazing, as you say, that it's printed in Taiwan. So as this is coming together, we use the word movement today, and this just came to my mind is that GPD has turned into, it's a worldwide, global movement. So how, as far as I'm sure, because you offer subscriptions, how do you all function together? I mean, because you're the editor, right? How do you get this, each piece to work together? Is there a trick to that? Is there a schedule? You had mentioned that as you were walking through and became the editor of GPD, that one of the things that you did well was deadlines. So how do you hold all these? I'm always amazed at this. How do you hold all these pieces together?
Well, one thing is you
bring
have
them
to
together.
You have to come up with a production schedule and know when you need things done, and then you have to hold people to it. Writers, I give them plenty of time. My job, if I'm dealing with a writer, an editor, someone who does page layout, or a printer, my job is to make sure they succeed in their job. So in doing so, I make sure that they have plenty of time. For example, writers have 4 weeks to write these stories, and I send them, they have plenty of information to write it, and each article that they write is usually about 3 paragraphs, and I'll give about 3 of them per writer. So they can do it. The same thing happens with page layout or for printing, and just make sure that I know how much time do they need in order to do the job right. So the production schedule reflects that.
You know, I was thinking back during the time that I was a writer for GPD, and one of the things, you've worked with many writers, so you may not remember this, but one of my issues with my writing was, you wouldn't see this because I'm on the other side, condensing everything down to, what was that about at that time? Was like 250 words, if I remember, or 200?
Yeah, we cut it down to about 230 now.
Yeah.
And for the podcast, it's even shorter.
Yeah, and so also I learned to be better at using commas. So not only did it give me the opportunity to shore up my writing, but also I learned by writing, by the material that you sent, I learned a lot about different people groups. And so even before I began to write for GPD, though my church, how I became familiar with it, we have a mission board there with a big world map on it, and wherever we have people that are staying as missionaries, we have all these pins, on the board. But then there's all their cards. But then underneath there was always these booklets. And I think I'm guessing there was about 10. And so to make sure, people didn't just take them and throw them off to the side, the policy was, when you're done with it, to take it back. And I read through, that was before I became a writer, I read through every GPD. And that was before I started traveling myself. So it's interesting now. Then I became a writer that still today, now I can't find which booklet I wrote in, but today I'll be reading something and I'll say, hey, I remember them. How do I remember those people? And it was from GPD. Writing and prior, even just reading through, because it's what I enjoyed about GPD. It is not, and give you a little promo here, is what I enjoyed about going through this was not just the prayer, but I could also learn about the people. And I felt like I was informed as I pray. So anyone that's listening to this later, as you're listening, you know, these things are good when we're given like a prayer sheet from our churches or maybe a group that we're in, and we have these points to pray for this, and maybe it's pray for our nation or our mayor or whomever, or someone in our family, or someone is ill. As what I love about GPD is there's the prayer point at the end, but there's information about the people. So, for instance, if we're praying for an area, I'll just say a people group in China, I was reading something about them. And for me, because I'm a visual, I felt like it was always taking me right to where these people reside. And so when I started traveling, I was always excited. Maybe I'll run into someone like this. Maybe I'll run into a people group that we had prayed for. So have you, maybe this isn't in any of the questions that we discussed, but this just kind of rose to the top of my mind. Have you had any reports of, you know, an area where you've prayed for a certain people group and they ended up with a witness and they've heard the gospel?
Oftentimes what happens is it's something a little more general than that. For example, we pray for people in Iran, but that's where the fastest growing church is right now, is Iran. The second fastest growing church would be Afghanistan, both Muslim countries. We prayed for both countries and for the people groups within them many, many times in the Global Prayer Digest. Sometimes, though, when you're out and about, if you're traveling, sometimes you run into people. In fact, you could even run into them here in the United States. One of the most unreached people groups in the world are the Patels. And if you go to a motel and you see someone from India there, it's usually someone from that people group. And in the 33 years I've been involved with Global Prayer Digest, only once have I met a family that's full-time working with Patels. Very nice people. So those things happen. Sometimes you have things happening when you're overseas. When I was in my 30s, I visited India. I was doing research for the Global Prayer Digest. I got lost at one point in Mumbai, and I had to get led back to a bus. Well, this girl, teenage girl, just cute teenage girl, just looked like anyone else from India. It turns out she's Jewish. There's still some Jewish people there, and they're definitely an unreached people group, even though most of them are going to Israel at this point. So it does happen. There was another time there was a people group in China, a Tibetan people group, and we were praying for them. The same day that we prayed for them, we found out later on, that was the time when they had the first believers among that people group. So it does happen, but it doesn't necessarily happen right away. Now we know from Matthew 24:14 that there will be some from every tribe, tongue, and nation that will be worshiping the Lord, but we don't know when it's going to be. But we do know our prayers are going to count, and our prayers are going to help contribute to that.
That is, I guess, to me, the exciting part is also, like, if I'm listening to the news or I am traveling. For instance, a few years ago I was in Istanbul, Turkey, and I was there just as a tourist, and someone took me to this little restaurant, and I cannot remember the name of the group, but this man said to me, let's see, I'm going to try and say this, and I'm not, is there something, the Uyghurs? Does that sound correct?
Oh, Uyghurs. Yeah, most of them are in China, but there are some in Turkey.
Yeah, and we're in this tiny little restaurant. It's warm during the time I'm there, and there's like they're half walls, and I come from the cold country where I live, so to me that's just so nice. And but I remembered when this person shared who owns this little restaurant and who they were and where they came from, I was familiar with this because I think I've read it somewhere in GPD. And so to me, it was exciting even to be sitting in this restaurant. I didn't meet the people who owned it, but they were a group of people that have been prayed for. So we know that people can, from listening to us now, that to be involved in this, they can pray, join and pray. So is there any other way that people can be involved with GPD? Do they order a book? Do they look online? How can they connect with you? I'm just jumping a little ahead here, and then I'm going to go back to a couple areas.
There are a couple of things that they could do. If they wanted to get the prayer guide, they could go to our website, globalprayerdigest.org, and in the upper right there's a box. You just enter your email address, and then from then on, every day you get a daily prayer for a particular unreached people group. You could also go to the Fellowship of Prayer Strategists website, and you could download copies. Or you could order a copy just in print, although that's, of course, a little bit longer process. People who want to write for us, we're working very closely with Joshua Project. And one thing that I really need are more writers for Joshua Project. We're writing profiles for them. Those profiles are often the starting point for Global Prayer Digest. They involve prayer materials, they involve information. If somebody wanted to be a little bit freer with their writing, Nancy, you'd mentioned that you prefer to write things a little bit longer than what we have. Mm-hmm. When you're writing a Joshua Project profile, you have that freedom to do that. You could write something much longer, although there are certain writing style stipulations, just like any other publication. But Joshua Project is all online. But one of the things is, if someone wanted to be a writer, we might even be able to use an editor at some time, someone to help me with the editing. I look it over and someone else looks at it, and the fact I've been here for 33 years often means that I don't even notice it when I use my in-house jargon. Somebody else will know right away, someone who isn't as familiar with it. So editors are good, and of course people who help with anything having to do with the internet, or especially websites. We've just had problems with our website not being what it should be or could be, largely because we just don't have the personnel for that.
Now, if someone was interested in any of these that you just mentioned, how would they get in touch with? How would they get in touch with GPD?
Ideally, they could email me at keith.carey@frontierventures.org, keith.carey@frontierventures.org. And by sending me an email, and of course it always helps to say where you heard about it, and it's good to know that people are listening to the podcast, I could go ahead and take it from there.
Okay, and now I'm going to back up just a little bit here. I really felt I wanted to get this information out there first, but what kind of, we'll say in the last few years, every leader, every organization, sometimes we just hit struggles, areas of struggles. Can you share with us anything that you could think of that has been a struggle? Whether it's as the organization of GPD or personally in the role that you fill?
One of the things that's especially hard is that people don't understand, they do not understand often about why it's so important to be praying for unreached people groups. Typically with mission efforts typically go to where the church already exists. Case in point, I just heard recently that out of 30 missionaries being sent, 29 of them go to where the church already exists. And one out of those 30 are the people that Jesus was referring to in the Great Commission, every tribe, tongue, and nation. He was not willing to let any of them, perish. In fact, there are even some of these unreached people groups are probably ones we don't know about yet in the central Brazilian jungle. Believe it or not, there are tribes there with 100 people or fewer sometimes. They still need to be reached. Then there are others, like you mentioned, the Uyghurs. The Uyghurs are one of the 31 largest unreached people groups that do not have a gospel witness, where less than 1 in 1,000 is a Christian believer. That's how things are with the Uyghurs. There's even a book out right now called The 31. You can download it. Robbie Butler is the editor. So there's a lot of things that people could be doing, but sometimes just helping people to understand that there's something very important about seeing these tribes being reached. You don't want to diminish, the nice things. You don't want to diminish bringing toys to children at a church in Kenya or in Botswana or wherever. Those are all good things, but the thing is that what often happens is we don't get down to the unreached people groups. Case in point, I was working with the Global Prayer Digest when the Soviet Union fell in late 91, early 92. Typically, the missionaries who went in, missionaries were finally welcome there, they almost always went to Russia, into the major cities, St. Petersburg and Moscow. If you wanted to reach the unreached people groups, they almost always went to the Kazakhs. Not only did they go to the Kazakhs, but they went to Almaty, which is the capital city of Kazakhstan at that time. There were so many unreached people groups that remained unreached at that time.
I recall when, this would have been a few years after what you mentioned in Russia, but I went with Campus Crusade. It's called Campus Crusade at that time, and the Jesus Film, and went into the Ukraine. And to me, the cities were large, but we didn't go to the major cities, and we only went where we were invited. So if I remember correctly, we went to two locations. And we were in, I know for a fact, the one that we visited, and we were working with public school teachers and using some material from Campus Crusade. And within this group, this was like a first time for them to hear the gospel. And that's what really encouraged me to continue to do what I do. Now, I don't work right now, I'm not in the unreached areas, but I travel in and lead a conference on relationships, and part of where we end up, the third session, is reaching others, the heartbeat of Jesus. And I talk about that, and I talk about whatever country I'm in, because I'm with leaders and churches, that you are in this country. It's easier for you. You know where those areas are. It's easier for you to go, and cost less, for you to go into these areas. You speak the same language. And so we have some right now that I know of, they've decided, because they do have they have a lot of churches there, but they have started moving into other areas, like I think one is Mozambique.
In fact, Ukraine is considered to be the Bible Belt of that region. A lot of Ukrainians have tremendous potential to be missionaries around the world, especially in their region.
Yes, and I think that's at that time, that was a long time ago, but that's what they were looking at, because we were leading within small groups, and I won't go into that right now, but I think that's kind of where I got my idea of everything I lead is more equipping, training, multiply, sending. Like when I was in India, I haven't met one leader that tells me no if they bring me in as a guest to speak outside of the conference. And I say, are you okay with me sending your people? So literally I send them to their neighborhoods, because they can go, they have neighbors if they are a believer. There was 2 women that I met in India that have prayed, and this goes wonderfully with GPD. I still have a photo of these 2 happy women. They have prayed together since they were girls in high school. Somehow they had received Jesus way, way back, and they have prayed, and they slowly get to know people around them. And so that's what I do. That's my way. I'm not boots on the ground in unreached areas, and I think that is how GPD functions also. Those people that do not go, I mean, they don't even go out of the United States or their country, that they still can have a hand in reaching the nations, reaching the unreached by praying. And I want to go back here. I kind of write little notes here as we go along. You had mentioned the Joshua Project. For people that are listening that have never heard, I know what it is, and you do, but what exactly is the Joshua Project?
Joshua Project collects information, and they're able to determine how reached a particular people group is. A lot of what they get is from the Southern Baptists and other organizations. They send the information to Joshua Project, and they know what groups are reached and which ones aren't. Case in point, I had a situation about 25 years ago. A missionary came in from South Africa, and he told me that the Tulsa people were unreached. That's the same group as Nelson Mandela. And I thought, okay, so we put them in the Global Prayer Digest and prayed for them. A couple years later, I went over there as a short-term missionary, and every Sunday morning you would see the hillside just covered with people, with women in their various uniforms going to their churches. Each uniform represented a different denomination. In other words, this group was very, very reached. In fact, they'd had a church for 100 years. Ideally, someone would be working with the men. One of the major tragic problems that happens over there is that the men, they might be day laborers, or maybe they have a job somewhere far from their family. And on Sunday morning, instead of going to church, they're just with their drinking buddies or just doing something else, maybe playing soccer. But the thing is that, they're still not being reached. But we would put them in a very different category than we would Saudi Arabs, who are Muslims and very staunch Muslims. The gospel is not welcome in that country at all. Or the Tibetans. We hear about the Tibetans. That would be another unreached people group. In fact, there are different Tibetans with different languages and so forth, but almost all of them are unreached.
And I can do the same, even though I travel. It's very easy, and I'll talk about the U.S., not another country, but it's very easy for us to, myself included, to live our everyday life, which that is fine, but to forget, I'm speaking to people who are believers, who have heard the gospel, who have received Jesus, to forget that there are people who have not. Like, for instance, the state that I live in, or the city, I should say, the city I live in, even years ago before I moved here, was described as the city of churches and restaurants. We're still adding restaurants. We're still adding churches, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But in comparison to what you have shared with us, sometime if I sit down and think of it, it's like, okay, we're and this is fine that we're in our churches, and we have a lot of people that are sent out from this city, and we can say that it's a blessing that we're able to live this way. But on the other side, we can forget. There's lots of events to go to here that are in a church, and it's easy for us to take that for granted, because it's part of our everyday life. Like I walk 3 blocks to church. I moved, and there was a church not far from me, and I decided I'll go visit there and see, how this is. I have somewhere I can do that. And in contrast is what you are speaking of here with GPD and praying for people that they don't even have one person that has ever heard the gospel. And I I just want you to know, Keith, that I really believe what you do is very valuable. I know you travel also, but as you're putting this together and overseeing this and the deadlines, to me, I'm good at deadlines, but I don't know how I do with all those different pieces. Because things happen in life. For instance, I remember I tried not to do this, but as a writer, getting in touch with you, I tried not to do it at the last minute. Something would come up. I'm not going to be able to finish this. But yet I knew, okay, if I can't finish this, someone else needs to finish this. So now I'm going to switch to one last gear here. And so do you have any future goals within GPD, like right now? Is there anything you're looking at as far as changes or anything you'd like to share with us that the people listening, that they can also not just pray for the unreached, but pray for the volunteers of GPD and also pray for you and your family personally?
What we want to do is fill up the bowls of incense with prayer for unreached people groups. That's been what Global Prayer Digest has always been about since the beginning, and started in 1982. And it's just a matter of getting more people praying and more people praying. It may just be that more people are going to be joining us from other cultures, other languages. And it's not too hard because we have the content, we have the information. It's a matter of getting it to people who can translate it and get it distributed to people where they're at. So that's part of it. Global Prayer Digest is going to be working closer and closer with Joshua Project in the next couple of years. We have writers and they have techies. We're having some troubles with our printed version for English. So that's going to be one of our difficulties. Can we keep that going? Because of the printed version, that's why people are writing the October issue, and it's the last day of January today. That's why it costs, $6,000 every quarter to be able to get it printed, whereas it'd just be a fraction of that if you're just online. The way of communicating is often difficult. I would love to see younger people get involved with this. That's been one of the struggles we have, is how do we communicate with the new generation. I'm doing some calls to Global Prayer Digest readers, and I find people about my age, I'm 61, I find people who've been praying over for 20 or 30 years. Almost everyone I talk to on the phone has been praying for many, many years. How do we keep getting the information to them in such a way that it's going to work for them? So we do have challenges, and we don't know what's going to happen in the coming years.
And as what I believe as I'm listening to your goals, is what I'm hearing you say also, as you mentioned, that getting the younger people involved is, the Bible is the Bible, and each culture is different, but speaking their language, I call it, so they hear. It's like, for instance, my main goal used to be I was traveling, and I love to do that, but my last few years, I've really focused online, and I became a techie. That isn't where I set out, but that's what I need to do, and to speak. And as what I found out, it was, I don't know how many years ago when Facebook first, it was out, but I think it was just at universities. That's where it started. It was students, and of course I was attending a college as a older student, and I was talking to this one younger pastor, and he said, Nancy, you need to get involved in social media. And this was my answer: not one more thing, please, not one more thing. So no, Nancy, you really need to get on there. And I did, and fast forward to where I am now. And I think that's where a lot of the younger people are hanging out. They're on their phones, just like us doing this. I can send that out there, and I can, in some places, I can target younger ones to expose them. Because as there was something I was reading, and we see it as we walk along, I'm sure you see it there, I see it here, people are walking with their phones in their hands. And they're looking at them. So I think we're living, even though it's a struggle, because it's always changing. But we're living in that land, as you just said, what it costs to get that copy done. And that if we can also use to connect online, just like sharing the gospel, to share it through online, and it is out there, and it's like anything, the enemy tries to use what's good for bad, but then we can step in and still use it for good. And there's something that just really resonates with me as you were talking about the future goals, and the big one I liked this is fill the bowls of incense, and getting younger people involved. In fact, I can think right now, I know of a church that they're in the middle of 40 days of prayer, and there's a younger pastor that is leading this up, and I'm thinking, you know what? I need to get this, not because it's me, I need to get this podcast when we're done into his hands to listen and hear about GPD, because I know this church also, they do a lot of outreach, and they have people that serve in other countries. So I made myself a little note here. I'm going to send this on. So as we draw this to a close, Keith, is there anything else you'd like to share, if you'd like to share that, and then go into one more time how people can get in touch with you?
Anyway, I'd just like to thank anyone who's been using the Global Prayer Digest. And one thing that people need to understand is prayer never goes to waste. When you pray, God might answer in the affirmative, in the negative, or it might just be wait. And as we pray for people in there to see God's will be done among every nation, among every people group, it might happen almost immediately. It might happen sometime in the future, but we do know, because we've read the end of the book. We've read in Revelation, they talk about some from every tribe, tongue, and nation worshiping before the throne. And we know it's going to happen. So it's a matter of, do we want to be part of what God is doing? Because that's what really matters in life.
Okay, and how can, yes.
Contact information. Ideally,
one more time.
Contact me at my email, keith.carey@frontierventures.org. That's keith.carey@frontierventures.org. You could try calling, although if it's a missed call, I'll never know about it. But the number here is 626-398-2241.
Well, Keith, I'd like to thank you for taking time away from your editing and getting things and bringing it all together for us. I really appreciate what you shared with us. I really believe there's a lot of good information that you shared here, giving us a really good, not just an overview, but a really in-depth picture of Global Prayer Digest, because I think we have so much information that's flying by us. I know I do. I hear people talk about that all the time. And even from some of the training I've had, it's like, okay, but you need to, if you have something, you need to bring it up to the top. The old way of saying it, when I used to deal with regular old manila file folders, get that file to the top so you know it's there. And I believe that's what we're doing with GPD as we share this here. So anyone listening to this later, wherever you're at, if you are on social media anywhere and you come across our podcast, I really, really encourage you, if you've kind of fast-forwarded and you're near the end, to go back to the beginning, even if it takes you a few times because you're busy, to listen through this. That even if you're someone that you say, oh, I don't pray good, or I can't pray, but I really want you to listen to this, to take the time and understand that everyone has a part of reaching others with the gospel, whether it is whether it is through prayer, maybe it's someplace within your city, maybe it's becoming involved with GPD. Maybe you're just reading it online, but taking their information and placing it on your social media pages and sharing it, whether it's on your Twitter or Facebook or whatever it is that you use out there. Maybe you know some people that are really interested in praying, but they've asked some questions about people that have never heard the gospel. Then share this information with them. If they're not someone that's going to listen to a podcast, then give them the website address, which is globalprayerdigest.org. They can sign up there. So it's what I love about today's world. As we look at GPD, we are seeing that we can be involved in different ways, whether you get the information online or you go to the website. Once again, that's globalprayerdigest.org, and you can order a subscription there. And I know, to me, I just love holding it in my hand, having that booklet in my hand. So once again, I appreciate Keith's time stopping in, and who knows, maybe one of these days. I've tried to get out there to meet him a few years ago, and I was unable to do that. I've been in a city south of him, but I still haven't been able to make it to his office. So who knows, maybe one of these days we will get to meet. And now I want to go into just a little bit of information with the relationships of the heart with Nancy. You know, it is getting more difficult because of all this information that's out there. When we want to connect with a certain ministry or a certain organization, to find it on our social media pages, especially the ones, and they are great, but they scroll, right? We look at Facebook, we look at Twitter, we look at some other things that are out there, and they just scroll. So it's what I have set up is a community group in an email, and all you have to do is email me at nancy@relationshipswithnancy.com, and if you email me, is what I will do, request to be placed in our community news in email. And it's what you will receive, for instance, talking about GPD. As soon as I have a podcast that's available, if you've already signed up there, is what will happen. That will just be sent out to you. And if it's something you want to listen to, all you need to do is click right in through the email or anything else that we're doing here. For instance, I have a paperback, and it's also on Kindle, A Hurting Heart Turned Inside Out. You can go on over to Amazon, look there, or if you sign up to be part of our community through email, I'll have it listed there. Sometimes we throw in some downloads. For instance, not long ago I wrote something, I pulled it out of our Relationship of the Heart conference for leaders, but I have 10 pages of talking about forgiveness and what does God's Word say about forgiveness, and that's free to you. Now, of course, the book, yes, there's a fee, but also I include free resources for you. Any of our past podcasts are listed there, so the best way to sign up and to join me, or if you have some more questions first before I place your email address in there, please know, as a disclaimer, I never just pull an email address from somewhere and place you within our community news or within our community without your permission, and I do not share your email address with anyone else. Also, to be released, and this is the last thing, to be released in about 7 to 10 days. I'll be releasing the book Quotes from the Heart for Women Leaders. It's just a tiny little book. I've kind of revised it. I think it's like 49 pages. But this just has some quotes within it that I have pulled from different things that I've written, places where I have been a guest speaker or a teacher, and I rounded up everything that deals with women. So you can also email me to get the information on this booklet. It's kind of delayed. I was hoping it would be out there for your use today, but due to, if you have heard the news about the areas where there is snow everywhere, or the areas where it's really, really cold, well, I am in the what they're calling the vortex, Maine. I call it the tundra, where it's really, really cold here. So we've had some days that the mail has not arrived, and so my last time of editing my book has been delayed because it's sitting in the post office until our mailmen and women are back on the street. So once again, thank you for stopping in and listening to us, and thank you for Keith for joining us today. I hope there's something within this podcast that you have listened to that touches your heart. And please, don't be afraid to get in touch with anyone that we interview on our podcast. That's why they're coming on here. It's not just about me. Yes, I'm sharing my information, but it's about also sharing what other leaders are doing. And maybe as a leader, also, you can learn something from what this person is doing that we're interviewing. For instance, I'll go back to this. With Keith was talking about deadlines. It was within the part here where we talked about how did he become part of GPD. Well, he found out that he was good with deadlines, and here 33 years later he is still part of GPD and helping God's helping him, I should say, to take a step into the future. So please pray for the volunteers of GPD, and especially pray for Keith as he leads GPD into the next step of the goals that God has placed on their hearts. And we'll be back again next week with Relationships of the Heart with Nancy, our podcast for leaders.